Hey guys, it's Mrs. Olenichek. Today we're going to talk about some properties of water. Water is important, and we talk about water because all life occurs in water. So all the chemical reactions that go on in your body depend on water to be able to occur. So your cells are covered in water, they're also filled with water. The structure of water really affects its function. So a water molecule is H2O, right? That's two hydrogens, one oxygen, and they're held together by a covalent bond. So the oxygen is covalently bonded to both hydrogens, which means that they're sharing electrons. Water's polar because while it's sharing electrons, the electrons aren't going to be shared equally. So because oxygen has a stronger pull, it has more protons in its nucleus, and there's not too much shielding from the electrons, and so it's actually going to pull more on those electrons in that shared bond, and so it's going to end up with a slightly negative charge. The hydrogens, on the other hand, because they're not getting as much of the electrons' attention, are going to end up with a slightly positive charge, so you have that unequal distribution. This is actually really important because it allows water to do all the really cool things that it does. Hydrogen bonds, these kind of attractions between the partially negative oxygen and the partially positive hydrogen of another water molecule, give water the majority of its properties. So those slightly positive hydrogens are attracted to the slightly negative oxygens. It makes them kind of sticky. They're going to be attracted to each other, and they're going to arrange themselves so that their partially negative end is always closer to their partially positive end. When in doubt, it's all about the hydrogen bonding. So all of the properties that we're going to see, the majority of them are the result of this kind of hydrogen bonding, which is the result of water being a polar molecule. So some of the properties of water are cohesion and adhesion, and this cohesion and adhesion results in surface tension and capillary action. And I'm going to get into kind of more details of each of these as we go through, but this is just a list. It's a really good solvent. It's a great solvent. Most things dissolve in water. Something that's hydrophilic is going to be attracted to water, and therefore it will dissolve in water, versus something that would be hydrophobic or water-fearing is not going to dissolve in water. Water is less dense as a solid. Ice floats. That doesn't seem so amazing because we see it all the time, but really I think water is the only thing I can think of that's less dense as a solid, and that gives it a lot of really cool properties. It has a high specific heat, which means that it stores a lot of heat, so it can store a lot of energy before changing temperature, and kind of the flip side of that is a high heat of vaporization. So it's going to take a lot of energy to get it to vaporize. So let's take a look at cohesion and adhesion. So cohesion means that it sticks to itself. Adhesion is like an adhesive, sticks to something else. So cohesion is all about the hydrogen bonding between two or more water molecules. So water sticking to itself. This results in surface tension. So if you've ever done a belly flop, you know what it's like to deal with surface tension. So those water molecules, especially at the surface, are all going to be more attracted to each other than they are to the air, and it causes that kind of film. That's also why water striders and other insects can utilize that surface tension to walk across. This also is how your drinking straws work, so it really contributes to water sticking to itself. So as you apply negative pressure by sucking on the straw, you actually are going to have the water molecules be pulled up because they're all attracted to each other. Adhesion is where water molecules stick to something else. And it's usually because of hydrogen bonding between water and some other slightly polar or very polar substance. Capillary action
If you've ever played with a drinking straw and you put your finger on the top and you notice that the liquid moves up a little bit further than the top of the liquid, and you can kind of mess with that, that's capillary action. The meniscus, that little smile right there that you get. So over here, the water molecules are attracted to the glass in this graduated cylinder. Here you have an example of cohesion where they're attracted to each other, and here you see adhesion where they're attracted to the sides of the glass. So the meniscus, this is the meniscus, is the result of cohesion and adhesion. Also, when you see water climbing up a paper towel, that's adhesion. Now you're usually going to see these two things together. So again, like your drinking straw is going to be using adhesion because the liquid's going to be attracted to the sides of the straw, and cohesion because it's attracted to itself. So a lot of these kind of come together. Transpiration is kind of an extreme example of cohesion and adhesion in action. So plants are able to get water from their roots to the tops of trees using cohesion and adhesion. So as water evaporates from the stomata, those are pores in the leaves, it, just like a drinking straw, that negative pressure, that sucking, pulls the water molecules up through the tree. And so as they're evaporating here, they're going to be pulling water molecules all the way up. Next, we have this idea of water being a great solvent. That means that it will dissolve most substances. And that's just because it's polar. So the polar water molecules are actually going to surround other polar things. So anything that's polar will dissolve in water. Solvents, so water would be the solvent. The solute is the thing being dissolved, and a solution is just when you have them mixed together. So not everything dissolves in water, but most things do, because most things have some sort of charge. Here we say that something that dissolves in water is hydrophilic, water-loving, and they're going to be polar. What doesn't dissolve are things that are hydrophobic. So substances that don't have an attraction to water are water-fearing, and these are going to be your non-polar substances. Fats and oils are a great example of this, and they have these long hydrocarbon chains. And so while the carbon is more electronegative than the hydrogen because of the geometry, because of the way that they're arranged, you're not going to have an overall charge here, and therefore it won't readily dissolve. Ice. This idea that ice floats is actually pretty amazing. And again, it has to do with these hydrogen bonds that are going to form. When water's in its solid form, it's going to want to arrange itself so its negative ends are close to its the positive ends of another water molecule, and in so doing it creates a crystal. These crystals spread out and make ice less dense. Now that doesn't seem like a big deal, but because of this, oceans and lakes don't freeze solid, and that surface ice will insulate the water below it, thus allowing aquatic life to survive the winter. If the ice sank, ponds, lakes, and oceans would freeze solid. In summer, only the few upper layers would thaw. We also depend on this kind of seasonal turnover in lakes. The sinking cold water helps cycle nutrients in autumn. If you've ever gone swimming, and you'll notice as you go out further and further, the water is colder by your feet because the colder water sinks. Well, when you have ice melt and that cold water coming into a lake, that's going to sink down and kind of recycle nutrients. All right, specific heat. Water resists changes in temperature, which means it takes a long time to heat water up. If you've ever tried to boil water, it takes a while. Again, it has a lot to do with those hydrogen bonds and how they associate with each other.
Because of this, though, water is a great moderator of temperature. Climate has a lot to do with this idea of water. So if you're in a coastal region by a large body of water, your temperatures are going to be regulated, meaning that in the summer you're going to be a little bit cooler because some of that heat is going to be absorbed by the ocean or that large body of water, whereas in the winter you'll be slightly warmer because some of that residual heat, that energy, is going to be released back. So coastal areas don't tend to be as cold as, say, non-coastal areas, even if they're at similar kind of levels. All right, heat of vaporization. This one's going to be another really good example of how these properties of water, this idea that it can hold a lot of energy before changing phase, is going to be important. And so so sweating is a result of, or takes advantage of, this property. As you sweat, all of that energy, that heat, is going to be taken away as your sweat goes from liquid to gas. It's something called evaporative cooling, and we use it as well as other animals. So like cats and dogs don't sweat, so they rely on evaporation from their tongues. That's why they pant when it gets very hot. So these are just a few examples of the properties of water and how they help us out. In class, we're going to be looking at some more examples of different properties of water, and we're going to be trying to associate this idea of polarity and using some of the vocabulary that we discussed today. I hope that helped. If you have any questions, be sure to ask them in class. Thanks.